Before we start, I just want to give a quick thank you to all of the crewmates who are supporting the channel on the SocraTetris Patreon page. If you are enjoying the channel, consider pitching in $3 a month in order to help me make videos and to have your name credited here at the start. With that said, let's begin. So this video is for people who are fans of From Software. More specifically, I guess I could say it's very clearly for people who are fans of soulslike as a game genre. And for those people, myself included, I guess, but for everyone who likes soulslike games, let me ask you a question. Let me know if this sounds familiar to you. Have you ever tried to explain what a soulslike is to someone and be met with multiple dozens of different answers, different focuses, different preferences of what makes a Souls-like, what makes it good, what makes it bad, why everyone seems to be trying to do it, and why no one can do it the way From Software does, that From Software just remains on top for some esoteric, unknown reason of the perfect concept of Souls-like, even though there are a bunch of other people who are trying to do it, and quite frankly, nowadays, there are a lot of people succeeding at creating Souls-like games and making them just as good as From Software ever could. Most recently this year, I suppose our star example of that now is Lies of P, which everyone originally made fun of as being Bloodborne at home, actually becoming one of the best non-From Software Souls-like games out there, whereas something like the game Steel Rising quite literally became French Bloodborne at home that wasn't very good, but in my opinion it was still enjoyable for its own reasons. Well, the answer to that struggle is, of course, that the concept of Souls-like is overly broad. The original Souls games were more than just one thing. They were a variety of different mechanics and narratives and world designs, and different people with different values, different priorities, focused on those things and said, this is Souls-like to me. And I think that there's a lot to be gained from being able to isolate that, to sort of break down the different parts of what a Souls-like is in order to understand what it is we're talking about when we say we like something from a Souls game. Maybe it's strange to you that the game that I would be talking about in order to emphasize something about the Souls series is Absolver, because from the outside, Absolver is very much an action game. The way it moves, the way it looks. Yes, there's a stamina bar. Yes, you can dodge or block or whatnot. But this doesn't feel like a Souls-like. It feels like an action game of a different kind. So why would I compare this to Souls games at all? What's the point of doing that? Well, the main point is simply just to bring supreme focus to the combat itself. Because I do honestly believe that Absolver, in terms of its combat alone, is a Souls-like. So what do we mean when we say something has Souls-like combat? Trying to break it down with something like stamina bars and dodge rolls is a little bit surface level, if you ask my opinion on it. In fact, I would say that the thing that defines Souls-like combat more than anything is that it is a rhythm game. It is a rhythm game that requires you to have a significant amount of precision, that you must play the rhythm of the fight well enough for long enough to win. You have bosses that almost exclusively fight on a 4/4 time signature, with a few notable exceptions, such as the Dancer of the Boreal Valley from Dark Souls 3, whose combat animations followed a waltz time signature, a 3/4 time signature, which made it quite difficult for players who were accustomed to and whose movesets were timed on a 4/4 time signature to be able to adapt to that kind of play. Of course, it's possible because of basically how a 3/4 time signature takes longer to hit a single beat than a single beat on a 4/4 time signature of the same tempo. And so you can delay your own inputs to try to become that pattern of a waltz. And this sort of rhythm game, this music-esque concept, philosophy, when it comes to designing a combat experience. Essentially, if you think of it in terms of Guitar Hero, you only get a certain number of mistakes before the fight is over. Those mistakes are measured by both your continued timing and also your available healing items or healing options. But if we use the Estus Flask, if we use the standard Dark Souls healing item strategy, you get approximately 10 times to heal, so 10 mistakes, otherwise the boss will kill you in the next hit. It is this concept of thinking of video game combat as rhythm game that punishes mistakes severely that leads me to compare Absolver with Dark Souls. Because, for one, you do have the resource management of stamina. You have the timing, the speed of animations. You have things like breaking stance, being able to play well enough to break stance pressure and take advantage of breaking your opponent's stamina. There's parries, blocks, dodges that can all be used as defensive options for responding to the attacks of the opponent, the rhythm of the opponent. But in order to do that, you have to match their timing in a very precise way. And it is precisely this demand for precision that Absolver emphasizes so much more than all of the From Software Souls games, from all of the games trying to be Souls-like, that sets it apart to the point of not even appearing to be Souls-like anymore. Its dedication to creating precision action actually takes the game so far beyond Souls combat, despite being based on it, that it enters into an entirely new genre of action game. This is mainly because the rhythm of the game is not predetermined. It is flexible. It changes with how the player builds out their character with Absolver as an RPG. The different stats that you select actually have an impact on the speed of your animations and therefore your rhythm as a player. It impacts the sort of rhythm you have to respond to the challenges that are put forward in front of you in the form of the boss characters. And even with the deck of possible moves, you being able to choose your entire moveset, the series that your moveset takes. Ultimately, there is no single rhythm that the game follows. It is a ever slightly adjusting range of possible rhythms. It is more free form. It is more like jazz, whereas Souls games follow a very set concept of sheet music. Absolver will change its tempo depending on how the conductor has set up the game. And in this case, the conductor is you, the player, and how you built out your character in the RPG. When I first learned about Absolver releasing as a martial arts culture fanatic, as a person who's done martial arts in the past and spent a good deal of my life actually trying to learn about martial arts as a cultural practice, I had purchased Absolver as soon as it became available, but at that time, and kind of still now, I didn't have a PC, I didn't have a machine capable of playing it in the way that did it the most justice. It is only now that I have access to it on PlayStation 5 did I finally get to experience Absolver for what the game actually was, rather than how I was trying to play it. My original attempts at playing Absolver were all about trying to recreate the fighting styles that I loved most in the real world, and thinking that it was more of a action game, thinking of it as a hack and slash a la God of War with the ways I could customize my combos, something that never really exists in a Souls-like game. Quite honestly, I was crap at being able to actually play and progress it. Until this year, I never beat the final boss of Absolver. It was only in this year when I decided that I was going to commit entirely to the rhythm aspect of the game by choosing to have the playstyle that focuses on parries rather than blocking or dodging, that I was able to defeat this boss that we're watching now. So let me take a moment to explain what I mean when I say that Absolver commits so heavily to precision action as a concept that it enters into a new non-Souls-like genre, even though the Souls-like combat could accurately be described as precision action. So where do I get this term precision action? Well, I get it from precision platformers, the concept of really high difficulty platforming games like Kaizo Mario version mods of Mario games that demand you have pixel perfect entries, pixel perfect timing as you progress through a platforming challenge. They are games that do nothing to teach you how to play the game except through repetition, failure, and learning from failure. And as design philosophies, that is essentially the textbook definition of how From Software goes about tutorializing, how it goes about teaching its world building, its combat mechanics. It really is do, fail, and learn as a repeated process, to the point that failing and not giving up became central to the narrative arc of Dark Souls, because they wanted to create a narrative that matched what they were trying to achieve in gameplay rather than the other way around. Beyond that design philosophy, however, I think the idea of saying precision action is also descriptive in its own right, in the sense that you are playing out a song, a set pattern of attacks by enemies, responses, and finding the predetermined opening for your attacks. And of course, there are ways to break it. There are ways to fight in unintended ways that are also as intended, because Dark Souls fancies itself to be an RPG as well, not just an action game. And that's perfectly fine. But focusing just on the action, if you were to play Dark Souls as an action game, where both your offensive and defensive options have to happen on a predetermined rhythm, you can come to understand that precision is the operative word in terms of how to get good at Dark Souls combat. If we were to, say, focus on something like Sekiro, which took the Souls-like combat's formula and dedicated itself entirely to parry timing, as opposed to say how Bloodborne made it more central to the combat flow, Sekiro made it the soul combat flow, and really emphasized this demand of the player to match the timing and the pacing of the boss fight design. Absolver goes a step beyond Sekiro in that being able to time a parry is absolutely important to being able to succeed. However, in demanding more precision from the player than a From Software game would ever demand, you not only have to parry with the correct timing, but you also have to parry with the correct direction. You have to be able to actually look at the animation that is happening on screen, see whether or not the attack is coming from the left or right, and then with the correct timing, parry to the left or to the right, specifically to match the attack that is incoming. It is not merely timing, it is visual timing. It is greater precision. And in doing this, Absolver has moved beyond the kind of combat that a Souls game adopts as one of its core tenets. Even Sekiro, the game that treated parries as the one center pillar of combat, mainly just made parries and other optional parries the entire game. There were special weaknesses that enemies would have to the different sidearms, the shinobi prosthetic tools, that would be hard counters, essentially special contextual parries that could give you an advantage against different specific enemies. But ultimately, these came down to being able to execute on the unique tool with the same sort of timing that the regular parry system demanded. It wasn't a unique version of the parry, it was a more advantageous version of the exact same kind of parry mechanic. Another thing that is important to Dark Souls combat, but less so the pure combat of it and more the exploration, the RPG exploration side of a From Software game, is the idea of what weapon you're using and its moveset. I would say that this was most important in Demon Souls and Dark Souls and became slightly less important as time went on. But the idea that you had a weapon in your right hand with a set of predetermined animations which would combine either horizontal, vertical, diagonal, or stabbing shots that had to be in your right hand became a tenet of designing Dark Souls combat that then went on to influence how level design and world design went in the Souls games. If you were in, say, a tight hallway, but the space was open up to your right as you were ascending a staircase, you would feel significantly safer, more able to act in combat than if you had to descend a staircase with a wall to your right and not being able to accurately aim down or have room for your animations to actually complete, as you would bump off of walls and basically have to plan your environment around the sort of combat deck that you made available to yourself. Absolver doesn't have anything like this. The world design is significantly smaller, and it's there specifically for you to be able to walk from one fight to another, to surprise you with enemies running out, to engage you in more combat than you expected. But the rhythm of the combat, the spacing of the combat, always remained the same. The main thing you had to watch out for was not accidentally falling off a ledge into a instant death pit. So watching your step became a part of the combat. A little bit of environment influence, but that's really as far as it went. There's no bouncing your attacks off of a wall if you didn't do your spacing correctly in Absolver. Where Absolver really changes that aspect of the Souls-like formula is in letting you craft your entire combat deck move by move, therefore deciding what kind of effects, what kind of animations, what kind of timing you will be using from the ground up. In Dark Souls, even though a rapier could both slash and stab, the moveset would be predetermined to make sure that every single attack is some kind of stab. A sweeping slash would have a different utility, and in order to gain that utility, you would have to simply move to a different weapon. Well, in Absolver, you don't choose the weapon, you choose the attack. If you wanted some kind of low sweeping crowd control attack, you would have to simply put it in your deck, then memorize where in your positioning, in your combat chain that move is, so that you can use it in the context that you plan for. In this sense, you can create a moveset that is essentially good for every single situation, so long as you specialize the different parts of your moveset. What you've been watching me do is essentially have two movesets, a right moveset and a left moveset, where whenever my Absolver's stance is to the right, it will stay in the right position. The right position is almost entirely based around having a single fast interrupting attack at the beginning, followed up by a oddly timed double hit attack or a significantly delayed heavy attack, so that I could both see an attack coming, interrupt it, deliver some damage, and then end my combo. Whereas the left side of my combat deck, my left side stances, which I hardly use at all against this boss, but really ought to because it came in handy at the very end on my very last attempt, were designed basically entirely to be very fast, small whittling attacks, death by 1,000 cuts style, just get in and do many small hits, but also designed to have moves that either put me in a position of dodging low attacks or dodging high attacks, so that at least one of my options for receiving damage was cut off whenever I was engaging in the fast style, which required less precision from me in terms of accounting for every single one of the attacks of my opponent. If I could get lucky and ignore some attacks, I could build luck into how I played the game against different opponents. Mix those two styles in with the ability to actually interrupt the opponent with well-timed parries, actually learning my opponent's patterns, their opponent's sequences, and which stances the opponent takes before they initiate those sequences, is what ultimately allowed me to beat Absolver, to beat the final boss of this game. And me just describing how to respond to the boss sure sounds a whole lot like Souls, but what I had to do in order to be prepared to have the options to respond to the boss doesn't sound Souls-like at all. If From Software were to continue the design philosophies of Souls games, of Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, into a concept that was purely an action game. That was not an RPG, that was not open world, that was not about exploration, that wasn't about lore, that was basically just about what the most toxic get-good sector of the From Software fanbase seems to prioritize, seems to care about. You would end up with a game that is much like Absolver. If you isolate From Software's combat down to what it is trying to do in terms of timing, reaction, resource management, and precision, and expanded those concepts to something far beyond the amount of precision being demanded in the Souls games. I think ultimately what they would settle on is something like Absolver. Having finally beaten the game this year, Absolver is, and I can say this with confidence, Absolver is my favorite precision action game, but it is not my favorite Souls-like. The number of games out there that can be described as precision action in the way this game has definitely earned the title are even further and few between than finding a good Souls-like game. And I hope someone else also figures that out. Lucky for me, I don't have to stop with Absolver. I may not be able to customize my own personal fighting style like I could in this game, but Sifu is made by the same people and is always available to me right around the corner. Thank you for listening to this ramble, and stay true.